He thought it would be just another night with his wife, a moment of intimacy behind closed doors. But before sunrise, he was dead, crushed beneath her body. At first, it seemed like a bizarre and tragic accident. Yet when detectives played back the camera footage from that bedroom, they discovered a chilling truth that turned this case into one of the most shocking crimes ever caught on tape. This is not the kind of story you hear every day. A husband, a wife, a private night that ended in tragedy, and a camera that revealed something far more disturbing than anyone expected. Tonight, we are stepping deep into a case that blends passion, betrayal, and cold truth. If you love true crime stories told with every detail, make sure you subscribe right now. Hit that button so you never miss another case like this. And as you watch, drop a comment below and let me know where in the world you are watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels, because what you are about to hear will test everything you think you know about love, trust, and the thin line between pleasure and death. They lived in Dallas, Texas, a neighborhood where the heat lingered late into the night and gossip traveled faster than the wind. To most of their neighbors, they looked like an ordinary couple trying to get by. He worked long shifts at a local auto repair shop, and she stayed home, often spotted carrying heavy grocery bags with a smile that disguised the battles inside their marriage. On the surface, their relationship looked steady, but behind closed doors, cracks were forming. He was proud of his trade, yet the money never stretched far enough. Bills stacked up, arguments flared, and the tension only grew heavier with time. Her weight became an unspoken presence in their lives. At over 400 pounds, she felt every stare, every whispered comment. To the outside world, she brushed it off, but inside the home, those insecurities sometimes erupted into frustration. Friends later described them as a strange pairing. He was wiry, quiet, and reserved, while she carried a commanding presence that drew every eye. In the beginning, he loved her deeply, shielding her from cruel remarks, swearing that size would never matter. But years of stress, financial strain, and emotional distance began to suffocate that promise. Relatives noticed him spending longer hours at work and coming home tired and distant. She, in turn, grew more demanding, craving attention and reassurance that he no longer had the energy to give. This imbalance brewed a storm inside their home. And in Dallas, police would soon be called to a scene so shocking that even veteran detectives struggled to believe what had really taken place. It was a humid night in Dallas, the kind where the air pressed heavy against the skin. Inside their small home, the couple tried to put their arguments aside. The television buzzed faintly in the living room, but the real drama was about to unfold behind the bedroom door. For hours, neighbors would later say the house was unusually quiet, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. He had worked a long shift that day, coming home later than usual. She was waiting, restless, her mood swinging between affection and frustration. By the time they entered the bedroom, emotions were already running high. What was supposed to be a moment of closeness quickly turned into something far darker. According to her, they were intimate when things spiraled out of control. She claimed she lost her balance, her body pressing down on him as he struggled beneath her. At first, she thought he was playing along. But within seconds, his muffled protests turned to gasps, and his movements weakened. The man who had always seemed stronger suddenly could not breathe. The scene grew chaotic. She shouted his name, shook him, tried to roll off, but it was already too late. His chest stopped moving, his face drained of color, and silence fell over the room. In that moment, what began as passion ended in horror. She called for help, her voice trembling, but when first responders arrived, the image they found was one they would never forget. A man lying lifeless, and a wife who swore through tears that it was all a tragic accident. Yet something about her story left investigators uneasy, and soon, evidence would surface that shattered her version of events. Paramedics rushed into the bedroom, but the sight before them froze them in place. His body lay twisted on the mattress, his skin pale, his chest unmoving. They tried everything they could, chest compressions, oxygen, desperate attempts to bring him back. But after several rounds, the room fell into silence. The husband was gone. She clutched at the sheets, sobbing, repeating the same words again and again. She said it was an accident. She said she never meant for it to happen, that he simply stopped breathing beneath her. The medics listened, but they had heard stories like this before, and something in her voice did not sit right. When the news spread through the Dallas neighborhood, it sent shockwaves down every street. Friends gathered in disbelief, whispering about how such a strange tragedy could happen. Some pitied her, imagining the guilt she must feel. Others suspected more, asking themselves why a man in good health could suddenly die in his own bedroom. Detectives soon arrived, their eyes scanning the small house, the bedroom, the bed itself. They took in every detail, from the way the sheets were pulled to the markings on his neck and chest. They wrote down her story, but already the pieces did not seem to fit. The way she described losing her balance sounded rehearsed, too neat, too carefully explained for a woman in shock. That night, as his body was taken away for examination, investigators made a quiet note in their reports. This was not just an accident. Something about the scene felt staged. Something about her tears felt forced. And something about this wife's story was about to collapse under the weight of the truth. The Dallas police entered the home just after midnight, the flashing red and blue lights washing over the quiet street. Inside, the atmosphere was heavy, filled with the metallic scent of sweat and panic. Officers moved slowly through the rooms, taking in every detail before stepping into the bedroom where tragedy had struck. She was seated on the edge of the bed, her eyes red from tears, her hands trembling. When asked what happened, she repeated her story almost word for word, as if rehearsed. She said it was intimacy gone wrong. She said he struggled, then went silent, and that she could not move off him in time. Her voice cracked, but the officers noticed how quickly she shifted between sobbing and explaining herself. The lead detective asked her to show exactly how it happened. She hesitated, then pointed to the mattress, describing how she leaned too far, how her weight pressed down on him until he could no longer breathe. The explanation sounded plausible at first, but the timing, the positioning, and her calmness began to raise questions. One officer quietly inspected the scene, his flashlight sweeping across the sheets, the pillows, the floor. He noticed small things, details that did not add up. The way the blanket was bunched near the corner, the faint bruise marks along the husband's collarbone, the absence of struggle in the room itself. If he had been fighting for his life, where were the signs? They took her statement, carefully recording every word. But even as she insisted it was an accident, the detectives exchanged subtle glances. Something about her tone, her certainty, felt unnatural. To them, the story was no longer lining up with the body on the bed, and though she begged them to believe her, the truth was already slipping through the cracks. The body was taken to the Dallas County Medical Examiner's office, where seasoned pathologists began their careful work. At first glance, the death could have been dismissed as accidental suffocation, but the deeper they examined, the clearer it became that this was no simple mishap. The husband's lungs told a story of their own. They were not just compressed, but showed signs of prolonged pressure, longer than the wife had admitted. Bruises along his chest and shoulders revealed force that suggested he had struggled harder than the bedroom showed. And then came the discovery that changed everything: faint markings around his neck, almost invisible to the untrained eye, signs of pressure far too deliberate to ignore. The coroner noted these details with precision, marking each inconsistency against her statement. If she had truly lost her balance for only a few moments, how could his injuries reflect such a drawn-out struggle? If this was an accident, why did the evidence suggest control, restraint, and force? When detectives received the preliminary report, their suspicions sharpened. The medical evidence did not match her words. Instead of a tragic accident, the findings painted a darker picture, one that hinted at intent. This was no longer about weight or imbalance. It was about a man who fought for his life, while someone made sure he would never breathe again. The autopsy confirmed what police had already begun to suspect. Something else had happened in that room, something the wife was not telling them. And soon, investigators would uncover the one piece of evidence that could not lie. A hidden witness that had captured everything as it unfolded. Detectives returned to the house searching for anything the wife might have overlooked. They combed through drawers, checked closets, and scanned the bedroom again. That was when one officer noticed something strange tucked into the corner near the dresser. A small camera lens barely visible under the shadow of a pile of clothes. It was a hidden camera, positioned perfectly toward the bed. The wife had not mentioned it, and when detectives asked about it, her reaction was nervous, almost panicked. She claimed it was an old security device that it barely worked anymore. But the officers seized it anyway, knowing it might hold the answers she refused to give. Back at the station, investigators loaded the footage onto a monitor. At first, it showed the couple talking, moving around the room. Nothing unusual. Then, as the night progressed, the moment of intimacy began. The room grew tense, and in chilling detail, the camera captured exactly what had happened. What the footage revealed was far different from her story. It showed the husband struggling, his arms pushing, his body twisting beneath her. His muffled cries for help were clear, his panic unmistakable. And instead of immediately trying to move, she held her position, pressing down harder as his strength drained away. The detective sat in silence as the video played. This was no accident, no tragic loss of balance. The footage told a story of control, of intent, of a wife whose tears afterward could not erase the truth. The camera had become the silent witness, and its testimony was impossible to ignore. The video forced detectives to see the wife in a new light. She had not simply lost her balance, she had stayed there, using her weight as a weapon. The husband's arms flailed, his legs kicked, his voice weakened until it slipped into silence. She watched it happen, and she did not move until it was too late. Investigators pieced together the timeline carefully. The husband fought for nearly 2 minutes before his body gave out. 2 minutes that could have saved his life if she had shifted even slightly. 2 minutes that transformed this case from a freak accident into something darker, something prosecutors would later describe as deliberate and cruel. The motive began to take shape. Friends revealed that their marriage had been under heavy strain. Money problems had pushed them to constant arguments. He had threatened to leave more than once, telling her he could no longer live under the weight of her anger. To her, the thought of abandonment was unbearable. And so, on that night, intimacy turned into rage, and rage turned into murder. When detectives confronted her with the footage, her face collapsed. She stammered, denied, then fell into silence. For a long moment, she simply stared at the screen, watching the reality she had tried to hide. Finally, she whispered that it was not what it looked like, that she never meant for it to happen. But the camera told a story no words could erase. The truth was undeniable. This was not a wife crushed by circumstance. This was a woman who had made a deadly choice in the heat of passion. And as the footage circulated through the hands of investigators, it became clear. There would be no escape from the justice that was coming. The trial began months later in a crowded Dallas courtroom. Every seat was filled, reporters lined the back wall, and curious locals whispered as the accused was led inside. She appeared smaller than her reputation, dressed plainly, her hands folded tightly as though praying for sympathy. But on the prosecution's table sat the one piece of evidence that would dominate the trial, the camera footage. Prosecutors wasted no time laying out their case. They told the jury this was no accident. It was an act of control, a crime of passion that crossed into murder. They replayed the video frame by frame, showing the husband's desperate struggle, the cries for help, the final moments when his body went limp. Each second of the recording weighed heavily on the courtroom, and many jurors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Her defense team fought hard. They argued that she panicked, that her size made it difficult to move quickly, that she never intended to kill him. They painted her as a woman who had lived her life under ridicule, who loved her husband, but suffered from insecurities that spiraled out of control. They begged the jury to see a tragic mistake rather than cold intent, but the footage left little room for doubt. The jury watched as she held her position, even as he begged for air. They listened to the coroner's testimony about prolonged pressure, about the bruises that suggested force. They heard neighbors speak of arguments, threats of separation, the cracks in a marriage already on the verge of breaking. When the jury left to deliberate, the courtroom sat in heavy silence. Less than 3 hours later, they returned with a verdict that would echo across Dallas. Guilty. The wife who claimed it was an accident was now convicted of taking her husband's life. And as the judge read out the sentence, her tears flowed once again, but this time there was no one left to believe her story. In the end, the case of the wife who crushed her husband to death was never about an accident. It was about control, about hidden resentment, about a love that had curdled into something unrecognizable. The camera did not just capture a crime, it captured the truth, stripping away every excuse, every tear, every lie. For the people of Dallas, this story became a warning, a reminder of how quickly passion can turn deadly when anger festers in silence. Behind closed doors, no one ever truly knows what a couple is hiding. Sometimes even the closest bond can conceal secrets that end in tragedy. As viewers, we are left to ask ourselves, what truly happened in those final moments? Was it rage, desperation, or cold intent? And more importantly, how many other stories like this remain untold, buried beneath excuses and silence? If you have stayed with me until the end, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Do you believe this was a calculated act, or do you think she truly lost control? I want to hear your perspective, and while you are at it, let me know where in the world you are watching from. Make sure you subscribe before you leave. More stories are coming, and each one will pull you deeper into the shadows of true crime. Until next time, stay alert, stay safe, and remember, sometimes the scariest secrets are the ones kept closest to home.